The champagne sparkled beneath the chandeliers, laughter echoed off marble floors, and I stood there, frozen, burning, humiliated. My father's hand had just collided with my cheek in front of 200 wedding guests. The sting of it wasn't just physical. It was years of resentment, of being the child he never wanted, crashing down in one brutal moment. "You're the biggest mistake I ever made," he shouted, his voice slicing through the ballroom like glass. Forks clattered. Music stopped. My brother Benjamin looked away, pretending to adjust his cufflinks, as if I had somehow ruined his perfect day. I wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor and never be seen again. But something inside me refused. Not this time. I met my father's glare, my voice barely above a whisper. "You'll regret this," I said, not as a threat, but as a promise. Guests gasped. Some pitied me, others pretended to sip their wine. My mother's lips trembled, but she said nothing. She never did. As the murmurs filled the air, I forced myself to stand tall, even with my face burning red. Because deep inside, I knew something they didn't. 10 minutes from now, everything in this room, every smug face, every cruel whisper would crumble. And the story of their perfect family would end in the most unexpected way. This was my revenge story, my true story, and it was only just beginning. Before we go any further, if you believe in justice served with grace, subscribe to this channel. You won't want to miss what comes next. People saw the slap that day, but they didn't see the years that led up to it. I was born into the Morgan family, a name that sounded powerful, elegant, respected. But behind the white fences and manicured lawns was a home built on judgment and fear. My father, Thomas Morgan, believed in appearances more than love. My mother, Evelyn, believed in silence more than truth. And my brother, Benjamin, the golden boy, believed he was untouchable. Since I was a little girl, I was the problem. The one who spoke too much, laughed too loudly, asked questions that made my father uncomfortable. When Benjamin brought home A's, my parents threw parties. When I did, they said, "That's what's expected." When I wanted to study art, my father called it a waste of tuition. So I waited tables to pay my own way. He said I was embarrassing the family. I learned early that love in our house was conditional, measured in obedience, not affection. Every hug came with a rule, every smile with a warning. I stopped trying to earn their approval. But I never stopped wondering why I wasn't enough. By the time Benjamin announced his engagement, my parents said, "Don't embarrass us at the wedding." I promised I wouldn't. But life has a funny way of turning cruelty into fuel, because that humiliation they gave me, it lit the fire I needed to rise. That's what they never understood about me. You can break a person's heart, but sometimes you awaken their power. From the outside, we were the picture of success, the Morgans of Charleston. My father owned a construction firm, my mother chaired charity galas, and my brother's wedding was the event of the season. People envied us, whispered about our wealth and class. But if you looked closely, you'd see the cracks beneath the polish. The smiles never reached their eyes. The laughter echoed too loudly, trying to drown out the lies. My father treated business like a battlefield and family like collateral damage. Every dinner was an interrogation. "How much did you make in tips this week, Avery?" he'd sneer, swirling his scotch. My mother would wince but stay silent, afraid to break the illusion. Benjamin, the heir, never missed a chance to remind me of my place. He wore his success like armor, shining bright enough to blind our parents to his arrogance. Behind closed doors, their perfect family was built on control and shame. Every time I tried to pull away, my father tightened the leash, financially, emotionally, psychologically. He said independence was rebellion, and rebellion was sin. So, I learned to nod, smile, and plan my escape quietly. At church, they sat in the front pew, shaking hands and quoting forgiveness. At home, they measured worth by reputation. That night at the wedding, when his hand struck my face, I realized something. I wasn't part of that illusion anymore. I was the truth they tried to hide. And that truth was about to destroy everything they built. This wasn't just a family story. It was a family revenge story. It didn't happen overnight, the decision to walk away. It came after years of being told I was nothing. After birthdays forgotten, after dinners where my father praised Benjamin's investments while pretending I wasn't even at the table. But the real breaking point came the night he said, "You'll never survive without this family." I remember sitting in my small apartment above the diner where I worked double shifts, staring at the city lights through cracked blinds. The air smelled like fried onions and rain, but for the first time, it also smelled like freedom. I was tired of apologizing for existing, tired of shrinking so others could shine. I packed what little I had, some clothes, a sketchbook, a used laptop, and promised myself that I would never again beg for love that came with a price tag. Still, I cried that night. Not because I was scared, but because I was finally free. I had no plan, no savings, just the determination that my life would mean something more than being the family disgrace. When I walked out of that house for the last time, my father didn't stop me. He didn't even look up from his newspaper. That silence told me everything. What he didn't know was that in trying to break me, he'd built something unshakable. The humiliation he gave me became the foundation for my strength. And when I rose again, I wouldn't just survive. I would make sure they never forgot the name they tried to erase. I started over from nothing. One waitress shift, one night class, one sleepless dream at a time. By day, I served coffee to strangers who barely looked up. By night, I studied law online, hungry to understand the power my father had always used against me. I wasn't chasing money anymore. I was chasing freedom. It was during one of those long nights that I met him, Grayson Cole. He was just another customer at first, always ordering black coffee and sitting in the corner with quiet confidence. There was something different about him, though. He listened. Not the way others pretended to, but deeply, like he saw right through the armor I wore. One night, after closing, he waited until the last customer left and said, "You don't belong here forever, do you?" I laughed it off, but his eyes stayed steady. "You have the kind of fire that builds empires," he said. I didn't believe him then. Weeks turned into months. We talked about everything: books, justice, family, the cost of silence. I never told him my last name, and he never asked. It felt safe. For once, someone saw me for who I was, not what I came from. When I finally graduated, he was there in the back row, clapping like I'd just won the world. That night, under a string of city lights, he kissed me and whispered, "The world tried to bury you. Let's show them they planted a seed instead." That was the night Avery Morgan died, and Avery Cole began her quiet rise. We didn't need a crowd or a ring of roses. Our vows were whispered on a beach in Malibu, the tide washing away everything that had ever hurt me. Grayson held my hands and said, "You don't need their name anymore. You've built your own." In that moment, I felt the truth of it. I was no longer the daughter who needed permission to exist. We kept our marriage secret. Grayson wanted to protect me from the media glare. I wanted to protect myself from the Morgans. We built a life quietly, in the background, far from Charleston's gossip. I took on small legal cases, helping women leave abusive homes. Grayson expanded his company Cooltech, but never boasted about his wealth. We both believed power was best used quietly, until the day it was time to speak. When he found out what my father had done, the slap, the humiliation, The years of cruelty. He didn't rage. He planned. Revenge, he said, is best served clean, not cruel. We began collecting information. Business ledgers, stock transfers, private deals. What my father never imagined was that every shady partnership, every corner he cut, would one day belong to me. For 4 years, we moved in silence, patience sharpening our strategy. Grayson once said, "A storm doesn't announce itself. It just breaks the sky." And I smiled, because when that day came, when I finally faced my father again, the storm would have my name on it. That's what makes this a true story, a revenge story, wrapped not in hate, but in clear. "10 minutes after the slap, the ballroom doors burst open. The air shifted, heavy, electric. Every head turned toward the entrance as a tall man in a black suit stepped in. His presence was like thunder in silk, calm, commanding, unstoppable. Grayson. He walked toward me with slow, deliberate steps, his cobalt eyes locked on mine. "Are you ready, Mrs. Cole?" he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. The room went silent. My father's jaw dropped. My mother's wineglass trembled. My brother blinked like he'd seen a ghost. "Mrs. Who?" someone whispered. Grayson smiled, the kind of smile that makes the powerful nervous. "Grayson Cole, CEO of Cole Tech, and Avery Morgan's husband." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The same people who laughed at me moments ago now looked like they'd swallowed ice. My father's face drained of color. "You married him?" "4 years ago," I said, steady, calm, proud. "In Malibu, while you were too busy pretending we were family." Grayson turned toward him, voice smooth as glass. "You raised your hand to my wife, and now you'll answer for it." The humiliation was instant. My father swayed, clutching the table for balance. Benjamin's fiancée stepped back, eyes wide. The band stopped playing. The chandeliers flickered above, like even they knew the scene had changed. I felt the weight of every insult, every slight, every "you'll never be anything" lift from my shoulders. For the first time, I wasn't the disgrace. I was the reckoning. This wasn't just a family story anymore. It was a family revenge story. A true story about how justice sometimes wears heels and smiles. As the whispers died, I signaled to the man standing behind Grayson, our lawyer. He opened a briefcase and laid out documents in front of the head table. The sound of paper sliding across fine linen felt louder than thunder. "Effective this morning," I said, my voice calm but sharp. "Coltech has acquired 73% of Morgan Enterprises." My brother's fiancée gasped. My father blinked hard, as if trying to wake from a nightmare. "You're bluffing," Benjamin stammered. Grayson's lawyer handed him a notarized statement. "Your father sold 41% last year to cover a lawsuit. The rest we purchased through public shares." The silence cut deeper than any scream. My father grabbed the paper, his hands shaking. "You tricked us!" "No," I said quietly. "You underestimated me." Then came the final blow. Grayson placed another envelope on the table. Inside were old court records, adoption papers, and a letter signed by a woman named Elaine Crawford. "I wasn't your daughter," I said, my voice trembling but strong. "You didn't create me. You bought me. You took me from my real mother to polish your reputation after your own scandal." Gasps filled the room again. My mother covered her mouth, whispering, "Avery, please." But I was done being quiet. "You spent years making me believe I was the mistake," I said, tears finally falling. But the only mistake here was thinking I'd stay silent forever. The truth hung in the air, thick and undeniable. For the first time in my life, my father looked small, powerless. And in that moment, I understood something. Revenge isn't about rage, it's about revelation. The crowd was frozen, as if the chandeliers themselves were holding their breath. My father sank into his chair, his hands gripping the edge of the table. "Avery," he whispered, "you don't know what you're doing." I stepped closer, my heels clicking against the marble. "I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm reclaiming my name." Benjamin tried to stand tall, puffing out his chest. "You can't just take everything," he shouted, his voice cracking. "We're family." "Family?" I echoed. "Family doesn't humiliate their own in public. Family doesn't buy a child to save face. You lost the right to call me that the moment he raised his hand to me." Grayson's voice cut through the silence. "As of today, your company, your estate, and every property under Morgan Holdings now belong to Avery Cole." The room erupted into chaos. Some guests stood in shock. Others quietly slipped out, unwilling to witness the collapse of a dynasty. My mother began to cry, mascara streaking down her cheeks. My father stared blankly at the contract as if it were written in fire. "I warned you," I said softly. "I told you that one day you'd regret this." When I turned to leave, my father's voice cracked. "Avery, please." But I didn't stop. I walked past him, past the band that had stopped playing, past the people who once laughed at me. Outside, the air was cool and open, like freedom itself. I looked up at the night sky and whispered, "It's over." For the first time, I felt weightless. The revenge story wasn't about destroying them. It was about freeing myself. When the headlines broke the next morning, the world saw what the wedding guests had witnessed. Billionaire's secret wife exposes family lies at brother's wedding. My phone lit up with messages from people I hadn't heard from in years, all wanting to know if the story was real. It was. Every word of it. This was my true story. But revenge wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Grayson and I used what we gained to create something bigger, the Crawford Foundation, named after my real mother, Elaine. We built homes for girls aging out of foster care, for anyone who'd ever been told they were a mistake. I visited the first shelter myself and stood in the doorway as a young girl looked up at me with the same fear I once had. I smiled and said, "You're safe now." She believed me. And for the first time, so did I. My father tried to reach out months later with a letter. I burned it. My mother sent flowers. I donated them to a women's shelter. Some stories don't need apologies to end. They need closure. Standing beside Grayson and my real mother one evening, watching the sunset over the city, I realized the truth. My life had never been about revenge. It was about transformation. They buried me in shame, but I grew from it. They called me a mistake. Now the world calls me unstoppable. That is my revenge story. My true story. My family story. And maybe it's yours too.